Hi everyone, I'm Kyle Dyer and welcome to Colorado Inside Out on this Friday, June the 7th. Let me get right to introducing you to this week's Insiders, our panel. Welcome to Patty Calhoun, founder and editor of Westward, Eric Sondermann, columnist at Colorado Politics and the Colorado Springs and Denver Gazettes, Chris Rourke, consultant at Rourke Media, Alvina Vasquez, an advocacy leader in Denver and a member of the PBS 12 Community Advisory Board. By now, you all should have received your ballots in the mail with the names of the candidates who want to make it through the primary election at the end of this month to the general election in November. And we are seeing, since our show last week, a lot of debates, a lot of messaging being moved around, a lot of candidates trying to say, we're the ones who know how to lead Colorado, Patty.
Well, let's say the clear winner so far in District 4 is Kyle Clark, because he has gotten such kudos for his handling of that last debate last week. National attention. Jimmy Kimmel has jumped in. So good for Kyle Clark, who held the candidates' feet to the fire and really asked some tough questions. But I really want to congratulate who's paid attention to the first congressional district, Diana DeGette's seat. She's held it for decades. And all of a sudden, thank you, Dave Williams, people are paying attention to the Republican candidate, Vladimir Archuleta, who is gay. He's head of the log cabin Republicans here in this state. And on Monday, Dave Williams sends out the God hates flags, anti-pride, demonizing gay people, the most incendiary, hateful piece I've seen in years, well, since he sent it out last year, a variation. But it's appalling. You didn't think Dave Williams could do worse, but good for Archuleta, who said, I don't want the endorsement, which he had just been given the day before by the Colorado Republican Party.
Mm-hmm. I wrote a column this past week on the primaries on both sides of the aisle, and I really called it an extremism test for both parties. I think that's what it is. In those three competitive Republican congressional seats that we're talking about, 3, 4, and 5, and Dave Williams continues to just make a mockery of the whole process in District 5. And I think there's every opportunity for him to lose that race, because unlike the Boebert race, where there are multiple candidates fracturing the vote, and Boebert can win with maybe a 40% number, in District 5, it's a one-on-one race with Jeff Crank, and Crank has the ability to end this embarrassment. On the Democratic side of the aisle, the races are a little lower on the political food chain. They're for legislative seats between sort of ultra-progressive DSA, Democratic Socialists of America kinds of Democrats, whether it's Tim Hernandez or Elizabeth Epps or a few others, and more centrist Democratic types. That's what this race is about, and ballots are out, and we'll have results in under 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Chris, what are you watching?
Well, the special election in Congressional District 4 will also be decided on the primary, June 25th. I was a moderator, one of the moderators for the Republican Rumble on Saturday, and Greg Lopez at the last minute, 24 hours before the debate, decided not to attend because he was not going to be endorsed by the Republican Women of Weld, who was a host for the event. That led to widespread whispering at the event. Could Lopez actually lose that race and lose that seat? Tricia Calvarisi, who was running against Lopez in the special election, showed up. She debated with 2 other candidates, a Libertarian candidate and another candidate. Very well spoken, talked about community, talked about family, talked about her rural roots, and she was very compelling. On the other side of the state, a poll just came out, shows that Jeff Hurd is pulling away from the pack in that primary, but there's a lot of territory still needed to be covered. I mean, it's more than 50% of the people that they polled have either not heard of the candidates or are undecided. So that'll be an interesting race to watch as well.
Well, I'm in Congresswoman Brittany Petterson district, so there's not much to watch there. So my eyes are across the state. I agree. I think what's interesting about CD4, while the fight is happening on the Republican side, I think the future of that district and what those Democratic leaders and those who are running for office might change the game in the next few years. So I think it's a path worth watching to see how moderate and how extreme that district's going to go.
Okay.
I have heard that the Democrats are intending, they've targeted CD4 and they're taking over those smaller races, the local municipalities and county governments to set up kind of that framework and foundation so that there is a switch in that district.
I think that's what's interesting is what happened in the late 90s, early 2000s when we saw this progressive push through the state. But really in the Front Range area, it seems to be that those strategies are working across other parts of the state. And I think it comes down to the economy.
And to Chris and Alvina, politics is not static in Colorado or anywhere else. Politics is constantly in motion. I think it is the heaviest of possible lifts for a Democrat to win in Congressional District 4, whereas Boebert's old district, CD3, is a 9-point Republican advantage, and CD4, that's 19 points. But nonetheless, let's put it this way. If the Republicans manage to bungle CD4, which is not beyond the realm of possibility, either now or, as Alvina points out, sometime down the road, the Republican Party will go from being moribund in this state to completely, terminally dead.
And let's watch the Colorado Democratic Party. This is exactly what they said they wanted to do. Play a literal ground game where they're electing from the bottom up. So while Dave Williams is playing all his games, the Colorado Democrats have announced this is what they're doing. They're going for small, lower level because it'll rise.
Okay. Again, you should do some research and look into the candidates on your ballot. And then we have those boxes where you can drop them off. But in-person voting, if you prefer that, those centers open Monday, June the 17th. Today, June the 7th, is the deadline for Governor Polis to either sign or veto bills that pass through the legislature, or else they automatically become law, Eric.
Indeed. The most interesting one is Senate Bill 210. I'm going to pull back the curtain a little bit, and even though the show airs on Friday, June 7th, we are taping it a day early on Thursday. So we are at a little bit of a loss here as to what Governor Polis is going to do, particularly on Senate Bill 210, which is the legislature's attempt, I think we can say, at the very last minute of the legislative session to try to mess with, and I'll leave it there because I could use a stronger word, the initiative that is likely going forward this fall to bring ranked choice voting to Colorado. So the Democrats who run the legislature, with some Republicans involved as well, wanted to, on the chance or even possible likelihood that ranked choice voting wins and passes public approval in November, they wanted to make it much more difficult to implement. It was a cynical bill in my mind. It's an arrogant bill. It speaks to sort of the one-party rule we have in this state. When politics doesn't become competitive, arrogance like this has an opportunity to blossom.
And the ranked choice voting already has enough signatures to be on the November ballot, right? So it's already?
No, it's not there yet. It's still going through the title setting process, but with the money behind it, if the sponsors want to put it on the ballot, it will make the ballot.
Just adding to more confusion for our voters.
Exactly.
Chris.
Well, and there's a commercial right now that former Speaker Terrence Carroll is running right now, coming out against what happened, which adds another layer of interest to it. But this is an example of last-minute legislation, last-minute changes, really mucking things up. If the changes and the vetting process of ranked choice voting was so important, perhaps it should have been in its own bill. And then it could be properly vetted and considered. Polis now is caught between the clerks, the county clerks in the state, which have supported the bill up until the point where it changed. And they want to see this bill go forward, so they don't want it vetoed. But voting groups are saying, this is unfair, you're taking away ranked choice voting and our opportunity to weigh in on it.
We know county clerks are supporting it. I think we need to listen to the folks that have to implement our elections and what their take is, because the implementation of something so big and complicated is super important. So we know county clerks are on board, and I think that says a lot about how the bill was written. Like you said, the last minute fixes, getting county clerks in there, making sure that they know what's happening with it. But yeah, we'll see what the governor decides.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. He's been busy making the rounds with those pens, hasn't he? He's been signing a lot of bills.
Well, at this time last week, we were learning that Trump's trial was rigged. And let's not forget, he used that term about Colorado's elections for the primary back in 2016. And of course, the rigged election of 2020. Colorado has been the gold standard with the access to the ballot because of mail-in, because of how those county clerks run things, because of the audits that go through and were approved by a Republican Secretary of State. So this cynical ploy to change things at the last second when the bill had the buy-in of the county clerks, it was doing things they wanted to do, and now it really is defying the voters who might want to vote on ranked choice voting. It's not my favorite, but plenty of other people like it. It's a really bad move that the bill came out this way. We'd rather have the gold standard that's maybe a little tarnished and needs a little fixing than something that eliminates a possibility voters could vote on.
President Biden took executive action on Tuesday of this week that limits the number of migrants who can claim asylum between ports of entry on the southern border. And he's getting mixed reaction from both sides of the issue. And Governor Polis was very quick to applaud the move and again mentioning the cost to local governments who are caring for migrants. Meanwhile, we're seeing some more numbers about how much money has been spent during the migrant crisis starting from December of 2022. Let's start with you.
All right. Well, the GOP is looking at this and saying, the GOP who's campaigning on a secure border is saying this is politically motivated and it's insufficient. Meanwhile, the Dems are split really on the asylum issue. You have the progressives that are criticizing Biden, saying that they need this asylum in place, and the moderates are really supporting him. Common Sense Institute just came out and said that the cost of the migrant crisis and mitigating it here locally in the Denver metro area is coming up around $340 million since December of 2022. That breaks down into almost $222 million in education costs for those who have been put into the school system. And this comes just at a time when we have fully funded K through 12 education for the first time in more than a decade. Uncompensated medical care is about $123 million. And in Denver, it looks like projections show Denver's going to spend about $90 million through the end of 2024. They're making cuts to some public safety areas just to accommodate this. So yeah, a lot of cost, and some people are saying Biden's action is a little too little, a little too late.
Yeah, all these numbers are a little mind-blowing. We've heard so many different ones. Alvina.
I think it's good to look at the numbers, but we have to look at the humanity of this issue. Comprehensive immigration reform has been held up by the vocal minority for decades, 4 decades. And now we have these patchwork policies, these asylum things, and it's just not solving the problem. Is that we have an outdated system. There's not a real line. People say, get in the line. There's no line. Everybody has a different path. It doesn't make sense, the system, the way that it's working. We need to go back to going back to the divisiveness of the Republican Party. We need to come together in comprehensive reform and get a real plan in place that is based in humanity, based on the needs of people, based on the needs of Americans, so that we can move forward together.
Patty, your thoughts?
Well, as you said, the numbers are all over, and we will be parsing those for a long time. You also see some of the studies that say immigrants, and that would include some of those coming in seeking asylum, that they actually add to the economy because of the work they do and the money they spend. So you've seen a lot of varying studies, and that'll take a long time to shake out. What we haven't seen a lot of, although FEMA just sent some more money here, is a lot of federal money to come help with cities like Denver that saw such an influx. And I would hope Biden would have acted a little sooner to help on that. And also it would have been good for his party to talk a little sooner about what the position is, how we do need a new program, rather than just come up with this so late in the game.
Alvina brings up the core point about comprehensive immigration reform, which, years ago you sort of felt that there was a viable path to get there. And now, given the political dysfunction, you just don't see any path. Both parties are going to have to give something, and something major, to ever get to that point. Yes, Republicans are going to have to give something on the humanitarian side. Democrats are going to have to give something on the border enforcement side. And any country, and Alvina and I might not agree entirely on this, any country has to have control of its borders if it's going to be a sovereign nation. That doesn't mean you can't have a big wide door in addition to having a border, but you have to have border enforcement, and Democrats have gotten softer and softer on that, with Joe Biden being caught in the cross currents. I think the only reason, obviously, he took this step in the last couple days was because of continually declining poll numbers around this issue. But there are significant elements in his own party who regard this as an overstep, because they really regard the border should be largely open and that humanitarian interests should be the only interests.
Okay. On a side note, separate from migrants, but still related to housing, this week Mayor Johnston pledged to get all homeless veterans off the street by the end of this year. Any thoughts from you all? Another goal for him, and by the end of the year. There weren't not many details that came out, were there?
Well, the details were how confusing it is, because if you're trying to get vouchers, you've got different programs for vets that have to then align with what the city is using. But Denver is not the first city that is focused on homeless vets, and I think he will succeed, just as other cities have succeeded, and good. It's a good population to focus on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The report from the Common Sense Institute that we were just talking about regarding the impact of migrants also talked a lot about schools, and it said that in the 17 school districts in the metro area, there was a growth of 15,725 students, their newcomer children. By now, most kids in Colorado are on summer break. And an interesting article from Board Hawk points out that Colorado mandates fewer school contact days than any other state in this country. I'm going to start with you, Alvina.
I mean, I know Chris mentioned that we're fully funded, but we're fully funded what the expectations were before the recession. So we're actually not fully funded. There's still a huge education gap. Tabor continues to be something that's constricting our budgets and really keeping our schools, unfortunately, underfunded. And voters are continually being asked to vote on these tax increases that they don't understand go back into the community, but we have ballot initiatives that are killing that local government funding piece. So I think it's an uphill battle. I don't think they'll change the amount of days, because there's very little state budget for that.
Right. It's I guess most states require 180 contact days, and we have 160. That's a big difference, about a month.
It was an eye-opener, because I thought that came as a big surprise to most people. But let's go back to the newcomers coming in, and it's such a double-edged sword in Denver particularly, but in other counties where school populations are dwindling. So in some ways, they were welcoming the newcomers because it boosted their numbers, which would boost their funding ultimately. But the challenge is, there also are costs involved. You've got a lot more English as a second language teaching to do. You're dealing with a whole crew of kids who need to be acclimated to the country. So it's been, especially in Denver public schools, a real challenge, and it's not going to go away anytime soon. But we're looking at, what, a $1 billion bond issue coming from Denver public schools, and that is going to be an interesting one for them to try to sell.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Eric.
First off, kudos to Alexis Menacall-Harrigan, who is an up-and-coming civic leader in this community, who penned that article for Board Hawk, and it sort of exposed this in terms of where Colorado rates among states. There are some states out there that don't put this in law and leave it up to individual school districts, but of the states that put this in law of minimum student days, Colorado was at the very bottom. Full funding, whatever that means of schools, is always going to be a moving target. And you're never going to have full enough funding for some interests, particularly teacher union interests and others, and you're never going to have full funding, quote unquote, given that there are other priorities in the budget too. You have to fund corrections, you have to fund highways, you can't exclusively fund education, as tempting as that would be. It would have been nice, this is retrospect, but it would have been nice to have this debate about student contact days, student in school days during the course of this past legislative session, when the funding for schools ramped up dramatically, and maybe that could have been part of the package. Yes, we will get to full funding under Amendment 23 provisions. But the quid pro quo on that is we're going to increase the number of school days in the year. And that could have been a package, but it's going to be hard now to do it on its own.
Yeah, and it is up to the legislature to do that, to increase the school days?
I mean, I assume individual districts can go above it,
yeah,
because it's a minimum.
Oh, right.
But yes, if to the extent it's part of state law, only the legislature or voters can change that.
Chris.
Well, good luck if you can get parents on board. I mean, I've covered school boards at the local level, and any change to the calendar or extension days is a community outrage. Parents, like to have their schedule the way it is, and it's set. And then you ask the question, is more contact time better for students? There are studies that say it is, and there are studies that say not necessarily so. I looked at some pros and cons about, having more contact time. It does give more instruction time. It's better for parents, especially if they're working. But again, there's some disagreement about whether it's better for the student. There is the higher cost that Alvina mentioned, everyone's mentioned. And then it does limit other activities that kids might do during the summer.
Yeah, but there are a lot of families who can't afford activities.
That is true. And
Right.
it's great to see a lot of school districts are coming up with these summer programs. That's not any additional cost to parents.
There's a school in Denver, a bilingual school, that continued through this week too, just to give the parents who are working many jobs a kind of one more week before the kids are home and they're trying to figure out what to do, right? Yeah, okay. Now it is the time for our panel to talk about some of the highs and the lows of this week. We always start with the lows, we begin on a high note, and we always start with Patty.
Well, yesterday we marked the anniversary 80th of D-Day, but we also marked a more ignominious anniversary. The raid on Rocky Flats was 36 years ago. Those were defense workers too, in many cases, who are still the people who were processing plutonium for nuclear triggers. Some of them are still fighting to get benefits for health issues. And just yesterday, there was also more legal filings that there is contamination south of Rocky Flats. So it hasn't been proven yet that it has reached a dangerous level, but this is the gift that keeps on giving. Rocky Flats Nuclear Weapons Plant.
Eric.
In the future, I would love to be consulted before Denver decides to host the world's largest convention of Miller moths. And speaking of annoyances, I guess we can weave Dave Williams into that discussion.
Okay, Miller Moss and Dave Williams, same category, all right.
Well, I got a phone call yesterday from a friend on the Western Slope who was very upset about a mailer he got, and it was sponsored by Rocky Mountain Values. He thought it was a Republican group that was trying to pit Ron Hanks against Jeff Hurd in the 3rd Congressional District. Turns out Rocky Mountain Values is a Democrat group trying to play in the Republican primary. When I told him that, he was very upset. So that's my low of the week. I get the political games, but he was definitely confused. And if he's confused, there are others that are confused.
Probably.
I want to underscore the low of that anti-LGBT sentiment coming from the Republican Party. It is just, I mean, it's despicable. It's out of line with where Colorado is, where families are, with young voters who should be really catered to at this time. And it's more than a low. It's a highlight. It's a screaming from the rooftops. We cannot be treating people that way.
All right, now let's talk about something good.
Well, again, good for Vladimir Archuleta for throwing out that endorsement. But also come down to 5 Points on Saturday, because it is once again the 5 Points Jazz Festival. It's going to be crowded. They're working on Welton Street and Broadway intersections, so it's going to be messy, but it's a great time.
And a great neighborhood. That's where if you don't know, this is where we are based here at PBS 12.
Well, real quickly to Alvina's point, everything she said is absolutely dead on the mark, but it's not only that the Dave Williamses of the world are out of step with where Colorado is and where the public is, they're increasingly out of step with where their own party is or where their own party is going, which makes it even more shameful. And then also quickly, Patty mentioned it, but the D-Day anniversary 80 years ago, we could only hope to have such unity and sacrifice and commitment and raw patriotism these days.
I just got the chills. I agree with you on that.
I'm excited about water. Now is the time when snowmelt occurs and the rivers fill up. Particularly the Gunnison River, which I love so much, is running about the 75th percentile of historical average in cubic feet per second. Other rivers throughout Colorado are full and brimming. A section of the Gunnison River was shut down just for safety reasons because the snowmelt happened pretty fast. But what was good was we had kind of a cold spring up in the mountains. So we didn't have that early snowmelt, which we have been seeing year after year after year. It's happening right about the right time, which is right around my birthday. So I'm happy about water.
When's your birthday?
It's coming up.
Oh, she's not going to tell us.
It's a secret.
We'll find out. All right, Alvina, something positive.
Something positive. Well, we're wrapping up, but like we mentioned, the governor's signed a lot of bills. I think a lot of positive momentum for housing and infrastructure. So a lot of advocacy groups are going to be out celebrating those big changes that will have a difference in the future of Colorado.
Okay. My positive has to do with the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, which is going to start chipping away at a T-Rex fossil to get it out of its rock, and in a new exhibit that opens 2 weeks from today on the 21st. The even cooler aspect of this story is how the museum got a hold of this fossil. Some boys who were just out for a hike in North Dakota found this bone sticking out of a rock. The excavation took place last summer, and the head of paleontology at the Museum of Nature and Science was there and said it was pretty clear that it was a Tyrannosaurus when they saw the big teeth. So apparently this dinosaur was around 13 to 15 years old, which is pretty close to the current ages of the kids who found it. So check out that exhibit this summer. That'll be pretty cool to see them working on it, trying to free the fossil from the rock. Thanks to our insiders, for and Alvina, a new one, for coming on this week to share some insight and make us smarter. Also, thanks to our team here behind the scenes at PBS 12, working so hard every week as well. We appreciate you, of course, who are tuning in every week or listening to our podcast as well. I'm Kyle Dyer. I will see you next week here on PBS 12.
PBS 12 believes in the power of original, local programming. Help us bring more shows, like the one you just watched, by donating at pbs12.org/program support today.